Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to talk about how to take a trampoline and make it last for the whole lifetime of your kids while they're at home, or your grandkids for that matter. So unfortunately, I do not have the trampoline anymore because my kids are long gone out of the home, and we got rid of it shortly after that because we needed the space for our garden. But I can't show you any photos of repairs or how to do the repairs because I never thought to take pictures like that back then. I just have pictures of the kids playing on the trampoline. So let me talk about some of the common things. So when we got that trampoline when our kids were pretty young, it was just one of those, I think we paid $200 for the full set for the, I think it was a 12-foot trampoline with the netting all around it. It came with the whole everything, and $200 total. It was a 12-foot trampoline plus the surround, the safety netting that went around it. And that trampoline got used all year long, even in the winter. If it was a nice enough, dry enough day, or even if there was snow on the trampoline, they would go play on it. One of the things to start off with is just like with anything else, that make sure you pay attention to what the weight limit is for your trampoline. A lot of times you'll see people go through trampolines, and I think that's because a lot of times the reason they go through the mat, that's the main section of the trampoline itself, is a few things. You know, it could be a cheap trampoline like ours was, exposure to the elements, and maybe people breaking the weight limit and how they're using it. So there's a few other factors that can come into play, but again, we did not pay high dollar for a trampoline. Yeah, I was still managed to make it last through our kids' childhood, and then gave it to the neighbors that were living next door at the time that had 5 kids, and then they ended up moving to Hawaii or something, and they gave it to some other kids down at the other end of the neighborhood. So that trampoline has been so many different places and seen a lot of use. There were several things that I did to extend its life. So the first thing was, coming back to the weight limit, was following those rules. I did not allow more than so many kids on the trampoline at a time. Some of that was also for safety, but people are going to get hurt. Kids are going to get hurt. That's part of growing up. But it was also to help not put too much weight on the trampoline because there was a limit. So make sure you're checking what that is. So let's start with the mat itself. This can be the trickiest part. We did, even though our trampoline was outside year-round for years and years and years, we never had to replace the mat part of the trampoline, but we did get a few holes in it. A couple of them were just small holes from just wear and tear and being exposed to the elements. Parts and pieces of anything that gets left outside in the elements year-round is going to degrade over time and become brittle, and so some of the smaller holes were a result of that. The biggest hole we got in it was because of a kid that came over to play on the trampoline, had a pocket knife, and decided, just so you know, he wasn't allowed to ever come over again after this. He decided to take out the knife and throw it in the air while the kids were all on the trampoline, and then it came down into the trampoline and obviously made a hole. Thankfully, it didn't come down into somebody's body part. Anyway, it's once you get those holes like that, those are going to happen like the average wear and tear. It's keeping the holes from getting any bigger. The best way I could come up with at the time, though I believe there's probably other methods, but what I used at the time because it was there, we had it on hand, was I simply took some shoe goo. So if you've never heard of shoe goo, it comes in a tube. It's actually a nice thing to have on hand. It can repair all kinds of stuff, including putting your soles back on your shoes when they wear out, at least temporarily. It doesn't last forever, but I would usually do this once a year, is I would go out there and I would patch those holes with the shoe goo. Of course, nobody was allowed on the trampoline while that was drying. I think it takes 24 hours. And I would usually patch both sides, the top side and the bottom side, and spread it out out across the material a little farther, and that was mostly just to prevent the holes from, not just to patch the holes, but to prevent them from getting any worse. And it worked great, but you do have to do it again the next year. But it is a cheap and simple fix that you can do. Now, some other common things that tend to happen with your trampolines are going to be same thing because of wear and tear and element exposure, is your springs can get brittle and break over time. Now those you can't just fix. However, you can usually find springs. I do recommend getting some springs and having them on hand, and that's what I did, but I hunted for a while until I could find some springs that I could have for replacement parts that didn't cost as much as a whole new trampoline, and it was great. I still have tons of springs left over, and I did give some to when I gave the trampoline to the neighbors, I did give them some of the extra springs, but I kept some for myself because we may get another trampoline someday for the grandkids. I just don't know where we'll put it. Maybe out at the property out there, so that would probably be the best place for it. So I kept the springs for that if we ever do get another trampoline. So I do recommend having some backup springs on hand because they can break over time as everything oxidizes and so on. And then related to that, this is what happened more often than spring breakage, would be the straps. It's usually kind of a V-shaped strap. It's actually just a strap would be flat, and then it's folded and pressed down and stitched down into a V shape that actually holds the little, I think on ours it was a triangular shape ring that you hook this spring into, and that strap is the part that is connected to the mat itself. Those were the things that most commonly came apart on us due to the wear and tear and element exposure. The threading would start to come undone, and eventually a strap would just completely come off. The spring was still good. Well, one of the things I started doing with that is I got myself an awl. If you don't have an awl of some kind, I recommend getting yourself one. In fact, I bought this one as a backup recently so I could have a couple. A lot of times you can find them in your local store. It's where I found my original one, and they're typically between $20, $25 around in there. This one you can also find on Amazon along with several others, but I'll go ahead and put the link to this one. I bought this one again because it's the one I'm most familiar with, because it's the one that I've used before. Now, I'll be doing a separate video on how to use an awl and how it works. I just have to practice again because it's been a long time since I've used it, but there was a period of time I was using this a lot. So not only was I repairing and stitching the straps back onto the trampoline, and I think they ended up being stronger than the original straps every time I knew, because I never had those come apart again, but some of the original stitching would, and I'd just go repair those whenever that happened. And there were even some that I looked for that if it looked like they were starting to get loose, I would go ahead and repair those since I had the awl out and I was pretty experienced using it. It's one of those tools that really doesn't cost much to put into your supplies that can really come in handy for many things, because I also use this tool to fix other things. When we used to have to drive into town to take our Taekwondo lessons, and that's also where we earned our black belts, our instructor in there had a couple of nice big hanging bags that were so old that he couldn't hang them up anymore because the straps were all starting to come apart. And so he wasn't able to use them. And he'd mentioned it one day, and I said, let me take a look at them. And so I looked at them and said, I can fix that. And so the next time we went into town, I made sure I showed up early and I fixed all of the straps on those, so he was finally able to use them again, and he was very grateful for that. So anytime you have a heavy fabric, you know, whether it be some kind of vinyl or leather, anything that's really thick and heavy, and you want very, very heavy stitching, it's not something you can just run through your average sewing machine. Having an awl is very important. So you can see the size of the needle. There's two different types of needles. You have a curved one and you have a straight one, which is right here. They store right into the awl itself. Your thread goes in there, and it's a special heavy duty kind of thread that it comes with. And you can obviously buy backup thread. This is a waxed polyester, and I never used all of the thread that came with it. I think I did buy some backup, but even as much as I used it, I don't recall ever using the whole first spool. So again, I'll link to that all down below, or you can check your local stores, maybe your hardware store, you might be able to find it in there. And if you don't know where to find it, just ask them, where do I find an awl? That's how I found it in our local store. Do you guys have awls? And because I had no idea where to look, and they found it for me. Okay, and then the next thing would be the padding, which I recommend having, that you put over the top of your springs. Sometimes you can get some really, really nice ones that last for a very long time. The one that came with ours, that was the one thing that wore out the fastest, was the fabric that went over I don't even remember what kind of fabric it was. It was pretty cheesy, and it just ripped to shreds within the first couple of years, and there wasn't much left of it. Now, for the longest time, what I did do though was I just kept putting layers of duct tape over that padding, because there was really no good way to take it off there and sew it. And as rotted out as that fabric was getting, the best thing would have been to do with that, if I was going to actually go beyond just duct taping it, is to get all new fabric and recover all the padding. But even the insides of that particular padding was really breaking down, and so I did go ahead and invest in a brand new pad to go around there that was made much better than the one that came with the trampoline. But there is that option of doing your own sewing and making your own cover, or recovering whatever padding you have for your trampoline. There's several different ways you can go about it, but believe it or not, the duct taping did prolong the life of the original padding quite a bit. And I think I even found some other types of just scraps of whatever and would put in there to add more padding to it before I duct taped it. I did do that for quite a while before I finally broke down and invested in a whole new pad. As far as our netting was fine. We never had issues with the netting. It never broke, it never tore. I never had to fix the netting itself. The padding around the bars, just like the padding on the springs, I did have to duct tape some of that, but it was never as bad as the padding on the springs. So what you have to look at when it comes to replacing parts on your trampoline, I want to stress this again, is make sure you add up the cost. For me, it was worth it to buy the springs and then eventually replace the padding, then buying a whole new trampoline. And because you also have to look at your time, going into setting all this stuff up. Because I remember putting the mat on the trampoline was a real pain, so I was glad I never had to replace the mat. And doing the netting around the trampoline, that was a real pain, at least on the one that we had. But you got to take all these things into consideration. If you have to replace parts, what's it going to cost you to replace the parts? And is it worth it to do that, or should you just go ahead and buy a whole new trampoline? Because sometimes mats, pads, nets, and springs can end up costing way more than just running down and buying a whole new set. So that's going to apply to a lot of things. But the way I managed to do it, and just having the kids be careful while still having fun, not having sharp objects on the trampoline, obviously, and not overweighing it with too many people, or if they're heavy people, being even more careful about how many are on there at a time. You can really prolong the life by just following some simple rules and having your kids follow those simple rules, but also having a backup plan. Even if you do plan on getting a new trampoline, even just having something like an awl or some shoe goo on hand to prolong the life, and try to get some good quality springs. I know the ones that I ended up buying as replacements ended up being a better quality than what came with the original trampoline, so I believe those springs would last for many more years than the originals. And even though I didn't pay as much as other replacement springs I was looking at. So just weigh everything out, price everything up before you make an investment into springs, pads, replacement parts like that. I just recommend investing in some shoe goo and an awl, because those are not only inexpensive, they have multiple uses. So even if you don't have the trampoline down the road, you still have the awl or the shoe goo to use for other things. Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. Just another way to help you save money, hopefully, on something that I think a trampoline is one of those things that is a good investment for kids and grandkids, because it can last for years and everybody can enjoy it. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.